Optimism as a mother and child are cured with new Ebola drugs in the DRC. The Trump administration set to deny green cards to migrants on public aid. And an innovator in Mali creates a voice app for people who can't read. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, investors cash in on World Bank bonds in response to the Ebola outbreak. And in sports, South Africa's Zane van der Walt sets her sights on the World Athletics Championship in Doha. In our top story, we start in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where a mother and child have returned home after being cured of Ebola. The two were treated with the new drugs, which scientists say will boost survival rates by 90%.
Spitting blood, oozing blood, all the effects of Ebola. So sick when we brought him here. And tests were done. We confirmed it was Ebola.
But 42-year-old Esperance Nabitu Buhedwa and her 1.5-year-old son can breathe a sigh of relief as they receive certificates saying they have been cured completely of Ebola. The two were admitted for treatment on the 31st of July. The same day, Esperance's infected husband died. No other family has tested positive for Ebola. Esperance and her son's case signals hope that experimental drugs REGN-EB3 and MAB114 can cure Ebola.
Certainly it gives us some hope and optimism because prior to this, with the mortality of between 65 and 70%, it was a dreadful disease. If you can bring it down to a much lower level, that gives people a lot of hope and that gives them the confidence to go in to get care when they do get sick.
According to scientists, more than 90% of people can survive if they're treated early with these drugs. Ebola has ravaged eastern Congo since August 2018, killing at least 1,800 people. This trend will be reversed once health authorities manage to administer the now highly effective drugs to all patients infected with the viral disease in DR Congo. Chomwono, CGTN.
Well, certainly a groundbreaking development in the fight against Ebola. Let's get you more now from Kinshasa. We're joined by CGTN's Leon Senyange. Leon, it's been a tense and tragic year for the DRC in fighting Ebola. Just talk us through how the Congolese are responding now on this news of a drug that shows up to 90% chance of survival.
Well, definitely the announcement comes as a very, very big relief to the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and especially those in the eastern part where the epidemic has really hit hard. But then again, it shouldn't really be a great relief for those within the DRC, but even for the countries that could and have been affected by this particular epidemic. Definitely, we have known that approximately 2,800 people have contracted Ebola, and more than 1,800 of those have actually succumbed to it. So this particular moment in time, the announcement of the vaccine and how effective they are definitely gives quite a great deal of hope to bringing an end to the epidemic.
Well, of course, we know, Leon, that Ebola is a global concern, but just talk us through specifically the role that the DRC government played in helping to develop this drug, and has there been any official message thus far from the government?
Well, this particular outbreak was announced in August of 2018, and yes, it has really taken a toll on the people of the DRC, and also the government itself has had quite a lot of challenges in trying to deal with this particular epidemic. Now, with the announcement of the vaccine and the efficacy, the 90% survival rate of all those that went through the trial process gives quite a great deal of hope. But how was the DRC being able to deal with a situation like this? In the beginning, it seemed a bit quite complex, but just over the past couple of weeks, what we would call a strategic transfer of roles could have ignited a particular transformation here. Just last July, President Felix Tshisekedi took over pretty much the response efforts in this particular epidemic, and therein he put in charge one doctor, Dr. Jean-Jacques Muyembe. He has about 40 years experience in dealing with Ebola. So just weeks later, then now we have headway in trying to bring down this this epidemic. So there's quite a lot that definitely has been put in, but the government still insists that Ebola is a national threat. It definitely can affect several aspects of the country, social, cultural, and even still political, and very much so economic, because it has affected in particular areas like Goma, which in itself is a business hub. So still preaching the gospel of awareness around Ebola and its effects is one of the particular roles that the government has done, and also trying to put together response efforts from the state and even non-state actors to ensure that there's quite a lot of energies and efforts being put in and behind trying to bring Ebola to an end.
Well, thank you so much. Leon Senyange joining us there live from Kinshasa. Now, the success of 2 drugs means Ebola has now become a curable disease. CGTN's Daniel Arab-Moy takes a closer look at the REGN EB3 Ebola vaccine and its potential impact.
The REGN EB3, a cocktail of 3 therapeutic antibodies to treat Ebola, goes back to the 2014 Ebola outbreak, which killed more than 11,300 people. Scientists were able to develop and validate this new therapeutic drug in just 6 months, clearing the way for additional preclinical research in animal models and a phase 1 trial in healthy humans in 2015. In 2018, it took scientists 21 days working with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and World Health Organization to prepare and ship EB3 to the Democratic Republic of Congo after the May 10th Ebola outbreak began. The May 2018 Ebola outbreak ended relatively quickly. However, in October 2018, the Democratic Republic of Congo experienced a second and more prolonged outbreak in a different and more remote provinces of Ituri and Kivu. The outbreak saw scientists securing various regulatory approvals, country approvals, and import licenses to deliver EB3 to providers on the ground in the DRC. EB3 is part of the WHO's ethical framework known as Monitored Emergency Use of Unregistered and Investigational Interventions, which establishes certain criteria for access to investigational therapeutics outside of clinical trials.
We're confident in the measures we're put in place and hope that we will see no further transmission of Ebola in Goma.
Until recently, it was unclear if EB3 would be used during this particular Ebola outbreak in the DRC. Doctors are now optimistic that EB3 vaccine treatment will safely impact the course of the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Daniel Arab-Moy, CGTN.
Eritrea has one of the largest immigration rates in Africa, with a large diaspora living abroad. Many have found their potential and contributed to society in various areas. But thanks to recent positive developments back home, some are thinking of returning to Eritrea to serve their communities. CGTN's Girum Chala has more.
Thomas Asfaselase is one of Eritrea's young diaspora residing in the United States. For long, he hasn't been back home, but was sending the hard-earned cash to his parents.
Things here cost so much that you need help from the outside. And, you know, a lot of the people that live outside of Eritrea were either born here or grew up here. And so we have a lot of family here. I have a lot of uncles and aunts, and my grandparents are here. So, I mean, sending money back home is one means of supporting them in the way that they need.
Thomas, who is a medical doctor by profession, however, felt he needed to do more than sending money here, and he took the most important steps.
I actually am here working with the Ministry of Health because I started a nonprofit in America to send supplies to countries that need them. And my organization is called Supply the Change. And so we've managed to send about $2.5 million worth of supplies here. So I think outside of money, people need to start looking at ways that they can come back to the country and contribute outside of the monetary gains, right? So if I come back as a doctor and work in the hospitals for a few months and let's say do a few procedures for free, that's one way of giving back.
Although there is no accurate data of the number of Eritreans in the diaspora today, it is estimated that hundreds of thousands of them are settled in Europe, North America and Australia before and after independence. With the return of peace with Ethiopia at the moment, more are looking at opportunities at home.
Eritrea can contribute to its people and in Africa as a whole, economically and politically. So I'm hoping there are many professionals and then also as well as academicians who are ready to come to Eritrea, not only sending money but to serve mentally, physically and also professionally.
Thomas, however, wants to see some improvements to be made in his country to encourage fellow diaspora to give back more.
Moving forward, one of the best things that can happen in this country is one, like a structured situation where if people from back home want to come back and volunteer, they know where to go rather than just talking to random people. And two, transparency between each different entity of government. So like the Ministry of Health talking to the Ministry of Education and having the dialogue between them so when we come, it's not just like starting brand new. So I think moving forward, that's kind of one of the biggest things that I would like to see my country make.
Eritrea's government is working to develop the mining sector, and there are encouraging results, for instance, in the gold mining sector. But it is the Eritrean diaspora which is majorly supporting the economy of this country. Eritreans abroad are the main and sustainable source of hard currency. Many say more and quick work needs to be done to see a booming economy soon. Grumtara CGTN, Asmara, Eritrea.
The Trump administration has become even more aggressive on its immigration policies. A new rule announced on Monday will effectively deny green cards to migrants on public assistance. This includes medical aid and food stamps. The measure falls in line with the White House's agenda to focus more on the skills of immigrants over family ties. CGTN's Jim Spellman has more.
A new Trump administration rule will bar legal U.S. immigrants from permanent residency if they receive any type of government aid. Before getting a visa, prospective immigrants will need to convince U.S. officials they won't need public assistance after getting here.
Through the public charge rule, President Trump's administration is reinforcing the ideals of self-sufficiency and personal responsibility, ensuring that immigrants are able to support themselves and become successful here in America.
Under current regulations, immigrants who depend on cash assistance from the government for more than half their income are ineligible for a green card, the U.S. document that denotes permanent legal status in the U.S. and is often a step to citizenship. Under the new rule, immigrants who even temporarily receive help, like disability benefits, food assistance, and medical care, will be ineligible for a green card.
The benefit to taxpayers is a long-term benefit of seeking to ensure that our immigration system is bringing people to join us as American citizens, as legal permanent residents first, who can stand on their own 2 feet, who will not be reliant on the welfare system.
Critics say the new rule is cruel and short-sighted. They say many immigrants need assistance for a short period of time and then go on to be productive citizens. As a child, Raja Krishnamurthy came to the U.S. from India with his parents. They lived in public housing and received food assistance. He's now a U.S. congressman.
Thanks to the incredible generosity and goodwill of the people of the United States, we then got back on our feet, became contributing members of society, and indeed, I would not be in the halls of Congress today but for those programs.
The new regulation is slated to go into effect in October, but as is the case with many Trump administration policies, opponents say they will fight it in court. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
Well, let's bring you more on this new policy change in the United States. I'm joined now by Brooks Spector, an international relations expert based in Johannesburg. Brooks, this new rule has been described as a cruel assault on the poor and on immigrants. What do you make of President Trump's green card policy change?
Well, I make of it a couple of things. First of all, it's fairly consistent with the Trump administration's ideological perspective in the way it sees the rest of the world and the way it sees foreigners in particular. But I also need to point out that in the United States, the president and the administration do not make law. They administer laws that are passed by Congress. This is, by Trump administration's view, consistent with immigration law. Many people are going to disagree with it, and you're going to see an enormous number of legal battles, court fights, cases brought to bear against these proposed regulations. There are 400 some odd pages of them, so it's a dense technical collection of material. In fact, the Attorney General from the state of New York, that's not a federal government employee, that's a state employee, state of New York State, has already announced that she will fight this particular set of proposed laws on behalf of potential claimants. Mm-hmm. But I think we need to read this in terms of the much larger picture of what the Trump administration has been trying to do this past 2 years. It's not, I think, consistent with the historical trends of the United States either. And as your package before our discussion noted, there are many people who come over as immigrants legally, and they need financial assistance for a period of time, and almost all eventually become self-supporting residents and then citizens. And over time, the studies usually show that such people contribute much more in total over their lifetimes than they receive in benefits for that short period of time. Mm-hmm. One more footnote, this proposed set of changes does not apply to people who receive refugee asylum status, and it obviously doesn't cover people who are, quote unquote, illegally in the United States, who didn't come through the normal process of applying for a visa in the first place. They're not eligible in most cases for assistance anyway.
And Brooks, should we read anything into the timing of the announcement of these proposed changes? Of course, as you've mentioned, this is consistent with the Trump administration's ideology, but America, of course, is just over a year away from an election.
Well, as you can imagine, if you're just the slightest bit cynical, you can read almost anything the Trump administration proposes between now and November of 2020 as having a connection to the election campaign for the presidency. But this one, I think, is more consistent with that broad brush that started with the beginnings of the Trump administration, right back in its earliest days, when he announced that ban on immigrants from 7 predominantly Muslim countries that was subsequently modified, changed, modified, abandoned, and then brought back in a very different form, subsequently following various court challenges. This is something that is deep in the genetics of the Trump administration officials.
Yeah, of course, and so we will be keeping an eye on how this is fought every step of the way as it tries to make its way to Congress. Thank you so much, Brooks Spector, joining us there from Johannesburg. Let's turn now to news from Hong Kong, where a mainland reporter has been released from hospital, this after being attacked by protesters in the city's airport. On Tuesday night, a crowd beat up a journalist from China's Global Times after tying his hands. Fu Guohao says he did nothing wrong and doesn't understand why he was attacked. Before he left the hospital, many Hong Kong residents gathered to show their support, criticizing the violence. He and a mainland traveler were both targeted at the airport. Xu Huhao has more. Please note, viewers may find some of the following images disturbing.
Late Tuesday night, protesters turned on at least 2 people during violent clashes at Hong Kong International Airport. One man in black t-shirt was followed, surrounded by a mob, and attacked.
深圳嚟嘅，我係嚟送朋友嘅。
係送朋友嘅啫，咁樣一陣間會返深圳係咪？
係。
點解見到示威者嗰陣要走嘅？
咁你哋咁多人追住我，我唔走，我喺度做乜嘢？被打啊！我都係人，我都會驚㗎，咁多人。
Meanwhile, a reporter from China's Global Times was seized by demonstrators at the airport. Fu Guohao was tied to a luggage cart after being identified as a mainland reporter. And his yellow press vest was ripped away. Protesters hit him, dragged him around, and shouted for him to be hanged. The reporter was later rescued by police and taken away by emergency workers. During a press conference earlier on Tuesday, Chief Executive of Hong Kong SAR Carrie Lam said the ongoing violence will push Hong Kong onto a path of no return.
再次請大家放下歧見，安靜咗個情緒落嚟，用1分鐘去諗一諗，睇一睇我哋呢個城市。 我哋呢一個家，大家係咪忍心將佢推落去？呢個將會係粉身碎骨嘅深淵。
Also on Tuesday, China refuted several U.S. politicians' remarks concerning the Hong Kong dilemma, saying the comments are distorting the truth. Earlier, U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi tweeted that Beijing is intensifying its use of force against the protesters, as well as labeling them violent criminals. Hua Chunying, a spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, had this to say.
The remarks are whitewashing violent crimes as a struggle for human rights and freedom, and deliberately misinterpreting the work of the Hong Kong police as violent repression, when the police were only enforcing the law and upholding social order.
Hua says the remarks are inciting Hong Kong residents to engage in confrontations with the Hong Kong SAR government and China's central government. She calls for the U.S. to mind its own business and to not get involved in China's internal affairs. Cu Huiao, CGTN.
Meanwhile, the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office and the Liaison Office have strongly condemned the violence at Hong Kong's airport. A spokesperson denounced the attack on 2 mainland residents at the airport, calling the violence shocking and chilling, adding the attackers' behavior amounted to extreme contempt for the rule of law. Meanwhile, the central government's Hong Kong SAR Liaison Office issued its own statement saying the attack on a journalist is a challenge to press freedom. Now, Hong Kong's airport authority has obtained a temporary court order that restrains people from interfering with its operations. The airport also emphasized protesters should only march in designated areas. Flights resumed briefly Wednesday morning before dozens were again delayed or cancelled for the rest of the day. Protesters have been gathering since Friday, at times forcing the airport to close. Meanwhile, Chinese people living overseas have also condemned the recent violence in Hong Kong.
We call them mobs because their behavior has gone beyond the limits for protests or rallies. They have destroyed our national emblem and our national flag.
They even made kids hold banners that had abusive words towards the police on them. Residents were blocked when they tried to go to work, and they even hit some drivers. Such violent actions are not part of normal, peaceful protests or rallies.
We must maintain the peace and stability of China. And we must ensure that the one country, two systems policy has a healthy development. We shouldn't disturb Hong Kong with illegal or violent or any other means that affect order.
Let's take a short break now. Here's what's still ahead on the program. South African women lead the pack in buying residential property. And an innovator in Mali creates a voice app for people who can't read.
For look at some economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
with a dedicated and diverse team of anchors. CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice. Now, let's start in South Africa, where, historically speaking, many African women have not had the chance to own property, often due to cultural limitations. However, a recent survey indicates that in South Africa, the tide is turning and women are leading the pack in buying residential property. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
According to Lightstone Property Statistics, approximately 72,000 residential properties were purchased by single women in South Africa in 2018. It's a figure which surpasses the number of homes sold to men, which is around 62,000, and married couples, which is placed at around 65,000 properties. Lightstone Property provides information, valuations, and market intelligence on properties in South Africa. The survey also highlighted the fact that, in fact, women are better at budgeting and managing their money more tightly than men. Sandisi Wembutuma is the Group MD of one of Africa's leading architectural companies. She has been in the property sector for 19 years, and she can attest to the latest stats.
Women are leading the pack. Previously, like you've said, actually male have actually been in the forefront. However, women are getting more actually top positions, which translates to independence. And one of the manners of actually translating independence is actually ownership of property, being a homeowner, which is an asset that is always actually appreciating.
While the United Nations and other bodies fight for reforms in regards to equal property ownership and inheritance, South African women continue to make progress and forge ahead. But even so, the numbers are still skewed against women.
Property industry is very male-dominated. So the transformation report that came out last month, which is from the Property Sector Charter Council, depicts that actually women are still sitting at 7% in terms of voting rights and ownership, with saying across the board. Remember also residential is a subsector within the property sector.
Mbutuma says now that women are making inroads in residential property ownership, they can step up even further.
Property is a very important thing. So literally, I think in recent years, we not only going to see women that are owning more homes, they will actually go to retail shopping centers.
A view echoed by many other women.
It's really empowering, given the fact that how far actually women have come in South Africa. So them owning property just shows how strong and how women can take care of homes and actually do whatever they want in this new South Africa. So I think it's a very awesome and empowering thing to do.
Women need to realize what they're worth and how much they can bring to the industry. I feel like a lot of us feel scared and, uneducated on what it is most women can do for us. And owning property is a big thing. It's a long-term investment.
The UN's Sustainable Development Goals reflect the importance of women's rights to land and property, setting a specific target for equal rights to ownership and control over land by 2030. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Staying in South Africa, the latest Investec Gibbs Saving Index shows that while some households do save, this is often cancelled out by those who spend on credit cards, personal loans and overdraft to to make ends meet. Angela Coppola has more.
The author of the index, Professor Adrian Saville, says that corporate South Africa is doing a good job saving and investing. But there's no one funding the small and medium enterprises. Traditionally, that money comes from friends and family, and they aren't saving enough to invest.
A common perception is that the only way that I can save is if I earn more. But what we've got from a raft of countries that start on low income basis is that saving is actually a learned behavior, and that if you cut your cloth to your circumstance.
People earning variable incomes are probably the most challenged when it comes to saving.
As tough as it is, I am able to put some away. I'm planning to start something because I can't be working forever. At some point, I have to be doing something for myself. So I am managing to put some away. It's not much.
Some find it tougher to save than others, but spoiling yourself once in a while isn't a bad idea.
I am able to save, but it's very tough because you end up with literally nothing to spend on yourself. So it's a bit difficult to and you end up dabbling into your savings a little bit, which is not healthy.
Saving for particular goals is critical. The experts will tell you that having these goals provides focus.
I'm saving towards my studies at the moment. That's the first thing that I'm saving towards, and the next thing would be a car and then a house and so on.
Saving to attain specific goals is hard work, and it will involve sacrifices.
Some things that I'm sacrificing here, especially on food. There are some that, if you look at it, it might be luxury if you look at it. So you have to sacrifice. Sometimes you just buy things to survive.
I become very disciplined. Anyone who tries to borrow money, it's a no, I don't have it. You basically become like a mean person in a way. But if you want your things to go in order, you have to make a little bit of sacrifices.
A savings culture in any country, in any household, is a learnt behavior, and the sooner we start to learn it, the sooner we can start saving.
So the best way to become a saver is to do exactly that, to start saving. How much? 1 is a number to start with.
I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Sandton, South Africa.
We bring you some breaking news now coming out of Somalia. A suicide car bomb explosion has been reported in the town of Adegle. Sources say the blast targeted a military base situated there. There are some casualties reported. A heavy exchange of fire is currently going on between government sources and militants. The town of Adegle was recently captured by Al-Shabaab. We will keep you updated on this story as we receive more information. For now, though, let's bring you the very latest. We're joined on the line from Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, by Mohammed Kahir Mohamud. Mohammed, to begin with, what more can you tell us about this blast? Are there any casualties, and has any group claimed responsibility officially?
Well, Lindy, as you may have said, the latest from the town of Odigle, which is 70 kilometers from the capital, south of the capital, Mogadishu. The armed group Al-Shabaab launched an attack today in the morning, and they carried out a car bomb explosion at one of the new bases of the army. And then the reports we're getting right now, the casualties still unclear, but the armed group Al-Shabaab, the Somali troops who are based there, who captured a few days ago, have repulsed the attackers from the Al-Shabaab, and now the troops are in full control of the agricultural town. The casualties we are getting right now is only a journalist who was killed as a result of the explosion. He was from the Somali military radio. Other sources are saying 2 government soldiers were killed, and but the official confirmation is still yet to be had right now. But what we can confirm right now is that the Somali troops have repulsed the Al-Shabaab attack and attempted to retake the town.
Thank you so much for that update. That's Mohammed Kahir Mohamud joining us there live on the line from Mogadishu. And as he says, Somali forces have managed to repulse those attackers. And at this stage, the number of casualties is still unclear. We will keep following this story and bring you further updates as they become available. For now, though, let's take a short break. Your business news up next. Coming up, investors cash in on World Bank bonds in response to the Ebola outbreak. And President Buhari bans the issuance of forex to food importers in a bid to promote local production.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines.
You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In your business news, as more countries focus on domestic demands and the number of governments willing to respond urgently to disease outbreaks abroad wanes, the need for sources of emergency funds is increasing. Catastrophe bonds pay some of the highest coupons in the fixed income world and mostly attract specialist fund managers. The World Bank issued pandemic bonds for Ebola. Alexandra Majala has more.
The deadly Ebola outbreak in Africa is highlighting shortcomings of so-called pandemic bonds in halting contagions. In its wake, a new way of financing the fight against global diseases has lured investors with annual returns of more than 11%. 2 years ago, after the worst Ebola outbreak on record, the World Bank, under a program called the Pandemic Emergency Financing Facility, began selling high-yielding securities. The lender modeled them on catastrophe bonds that pay out in response to insurance claims for events like hurricanes. The pandemic bonds, the first ever, are triggered by patterns in death from infectious diseases. For example, a $95 million tranche insuring against an Ebola virus outbreak pays investors more than $1 million each month. Critics say the bond's complicated triggering mechanism slows its ability to stem infectious contagions. For the funds to flow to Congo, the disease must cause at least 20 deaths in at least one other country within a specified time window. Deaths must also increase at a minimum rate during this period. The World Bank, however, says the bonds are part of an innovative financing mechanism designed to provide early, rapid funding to combat major disease outbreaks. Due in July 2020, the issue was a bondholder's dream, offering returns found only in shaky junk-rated bonds sold from the best credit in the world and with a payout formula that was hard to trigger. According to the World Bank, the transaction was 200% oversubscribed. The premiums for the bonds, one of 11.5%, the other 6.9%, cost about $36 million a year and is paid by donor countries, including Germany and Japan. For poor countries, the facility is a source of grant funding for an outbreak for which the beneficiaries do not pay any premiums. The World Bank has made other funds available to respond to Ebola, including $300 million in grants and loans offered in July. However, the World Health Organization and its partners still need $287 million for public health operations in Congo. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has issued a directive to the country's central bank not to provide foreign exchange for the importation of food. Now, the head of state says his administration has achieved food security as the government works to bolster agricultural production. He adds the country's foreign reserves should be used strictly for the diversification of the economy. Some states, including Kebbi, Ogun, Lagos, Jigawa, Ebonyi and Kano, are alleged to have taken advantage of the federal government's policy on agriculture with huge returns in rice farming. Now, British American Tobacco's proposed takeover of e-cigarette maker Twisp has won approval from South Africa's Competition Tribunal. In 2017, the firm announced the deal as part of its efforts to increase its offering of alternatives to smoking. However, the strategy faced opposition from the Competition Commission, which recommended the prohibition of the deal. The agreement between the two companies has now been set on a series of conditions, including product allocation of not more than 70% of visible sales space by retailers. Moreover, there'll be no job cuts as a result of the deal for a period of 2 years upon completion of the merger. Now, despite the brief reprieve on tariffs, Washington and Beijing are still at odds over Huawei. President Trump said he would not do any business with the Chinese telecommunications giant, but he did leave the door open to future business if and when the trade war ends. CGTN's Jim Spellman has more.
A new rule prohibits the U.S. government from buying telecommunications and video surveillance products from 5 Chinese firms, including Huawei and ZTE. The U.S. claims Huawei and other Chinese firms could share user data with the Chinese government or even launch hacking attacks on U.S. networks. Huawei and the other companies deny any wrongdoing. The U.S. has provided no evidence of any risk. There won't be much immediate impact. These firms have little involvement in U.S. government contracting. Concerns about Huawei date back to the Obama administration, but President Trump has sometimes portrayed Huawei as a national security issue and at other times as a trade issue.
It's much simpler not to do any business with Huawei, so we're not doing business with Huawei. That doesn't mean we won't agree to something if and when we make a trade deal.
Huawei also faces a separate ban on purchasing U.S. components or software used in its smartphones. Huawei is pushing back, suing the U.S. government and rolling out a new operating system that could replace Google's Android OS if needed. Despite headwinds from the U.S., Huawei reports strong growth in the first half of 2019, but acknowledges more risk ahead.
Our business result for the first half was quite good, and we achieved a stable growth. But objectively, we are facing many difficulties. In the second half and next year, these difficulties are quite challenging.
Perhaps no wall has more infamy than the Berlin Wall.
Huawei has released this video warning that trade disputes could create a digital Berlin Wall, a technological and economic divide between countries aligned with China and those aligned with the U.S.
We must learn from history. No more walls in terms of trade. No more walls in terms of technology. This world needs an integrated global ecosystem that can help us promote faster technological innovation and stronger economic growth.
Meantime, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton traveled to London to meet with the representatives of Boris Johnson's new government, hoping to convince the UK to join the U.S. in blocking Huawei. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
Well, the U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton has in fact joined a frontline war of words in Britain's Brexit battle with Brussels. During a 2-day visit to the UK capital, Bolton accused the European Union of dragging its feet over the exit from the bloc. And as Richard Bestick reports from London, he claimed it was part of an EU ploy to, quote, make the peasants vote again and again.
John Bolton's visit to the UK capital is part of an intense White House charm offensive, resetting relations with the UK. It comes as Boris Johnson, Britain's new Prime Minister, settles down to the task of leaving the EU, quote, come what may, by the end of October. Bolton here in London telling ministers the UK is first in line for a post-Brexit trade deal with the United States, with a series of agreements carved out, quote, very quickly, very straightforwardly. However, it's Bolton's moves into the febrile world of Brexit politics that will cause most alarm, both in Brussels and among some in the UK, who regard the Johnson government as hardline on Brexit. Former British Foreign Secretary Jack Straw, for example, described Bolton as dangerously bellicose. He told UK radio that the US National Security Advisor represented a highly transactional administration. Britain, he said, would have to agree to US demands to secure trade perks, including falling in line with Washington's view on Iran. There are problems, though, for Bolton's promises of post-Brexit trade with Britain. Among them, the US Congress, which holds the authority for approving trade deals. And there's a significant body of opinion there opposed to anything that might undermine the Northern Ireland peace agreement. Richard Bestick, CGTN, London.
On to India now. The fashion industry has a reputation for favouring short-term trends and throwaway products. But designers in India are championing hand-loomed fabrics, and they say each fabric is a piece of history. Moreover, the revival of traditional weaving is helping to employ local communities. Let's take a look.
Indian designer Urvash Kaur started working with hand-woven fabric 10 years ago. Now she's among those who are trying to convince the fashion industry that each fabric has an individual history.
It tells a story. There is a story about everyone that has been a part of that process till the garment. You know, it's like every person puts in a little bit of themselves into that.
This catwalk show is an example of how the heritage of a fabric is dictating fashion in India. Over the last decade, more and more Indian designers have started using hand-woven fabric. The revival of the tradition helps support communities of weavers, especially for women.
Women who were in a family relationship with unreliable men for alcohol reasons or other reasons, health reasons. It gave them their ability to actually support the household, and thereby their kids were educated.
Indian handloomers weaved more than 5 billion square meters of fabric in 2018, according to Indian Ministry of Textiles. The industry accounts for 15% of all the fabric production in the country and provides employment to more than 4.3 million people. Indian weavers also contributed to 95% of all hand-woven fabric in the world. Michelle Vandenberg, CGTN.
Let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Food chain KFC removes plastic straws in over 900 restaurants across South Africa.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In South Africa, we start with a local chicken outlet that has officially announced the removal of plastic straws in over 900 restaurants across the country, helping to eliminate 60 million plastic straws a year. Wits University is now showcasing an exhibition known as #TheFinalStraw, displaying all the straws that the chicken outlet has discarded. This time, the straws have been transformed into art, a fascinating spectacle, as CGTN's Yulisa Njamela reports.
The announcement of the removal of the plastic straws by the local chicken outlet forms part of a new global sustainability commitment from the business sector that all plastic-based packaging items will be recoverable or reusable by 2025. In addition to this, and as part of its ongoing efforts to adopt more sustainable practices, the brand has already removed disposable plastic beverage cups from its KFC head office. It's all in the name of contributing to saving the environment. And those straws are now here at the Origin Center at Wits University in a form of an exhibition.
This is something very different for Origin Center. It's an exhibition about KFC getting rid of plastic straws. They're moving from plastic straws to paper straws, and they thought of making this an important event, preserving the last plastic straw and preserving it like in our pillars that we have archaeologically and stratigraphically, that was the age that we've now forgotten. There's two exhibitions that are made out of plastic straws. One symbolizing a wave of plastic straws, all the plastic and the plastic straws that find their way into the ocean, and then another one's a beautiful tree made out of plastic straws.
According to the United Nations, around 8 million tons of plastic ends up in the sea every year. That's an equivalent of a truckload of rubbish being dumped in the ocean every minute. So this local chicken outlet is helping to eliminate at least 60 million plastic straws per year.
So, and you just think that's one fast food chain, how many plastic straws are being produced in South Africa every year. So getting rid of those 60 million plastic straws from KFC is a big thing. So to encourage other outlets and other producers or food producers to move to paper straws rather.
While plastic has many valuable uses, humanity has become addicted to single-use or disposable plastic with severe environmental consequences. But the African continent is not sitting idle. According to the United Nations, within the last 4 years in Africa, more than 58% of the African countries have in some way banned plastic use. And these straws that formulate this display will also be disposed of responsibly after the exhibition. Yolisa Njobela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And coming up in your sports news, up next.